Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. My name is Nathan Sutherland, and Gospel Tech is a podcast dedicated to helping families better love God and use tech. We're a branch of Flint and Iron, a nonprofit Anna and I started a few years ago, focused on sparking positive purpose in youth. And our goal in doing this podcast is to help families basically fight for each other, not just with each other, when it comes to the world of technology. So I'm excited to have you here today. If you did not listen to last week's podcast, you should go do that. Basically, last week we talked a little bit about a walkthrough on in this big topic of how do we reestablish our tech boundaries as we head back into normal life, and we realize we might have some things not where we want them to be for habits and behaviors and those kinds of things related to tech. Last week, we specifically walked through what does it look like to make a family tech framework. And I actually walked step by step through the process with the area of music, 4 areas of Drool tech. So music was the way I did it, but social media, shows and movies, and then gaming are the other 3. And so go back, it'll walk through, it'll explain some of the silly things that say like Drool tech and kind of help all that make sense. Today, we're actually going to talk about what we can do instead of tech. So you've gone through a family reset and you have found, man, we have a problem with our tech use in this area. Now, what do we do? And one of the main reasons Ann and I have seen in our few years of work in this area is one of the reasons families don't implement change in the area of tech is it's absolutely overwhelming, right? Drool tech is effortless. It's available. It's super easy. And most importantly, it works, right? So just yesterday, I had my boys sit down and watch a show because I was making dinner and Anna needed to exercise. And so we were like, well, the kids are absolutely going crazy. It's torrential rains outside, which we're happy about because there are no fires now, but it's still crazy. And we need to think for just like 10 minutes. And so they watched a show and it worked. The problem, of course, is the creep that can happen from that. Like, well, it worked that time. So the next time I run into this issue, do I just throw Drool tech at them, right? Do I just make it go away, or do I work out another system? And we can get to the spot where we've done it enough where we were just surviving. We just got to make it. It was February and we're in quarantine. And then it was March, and then it was April, and then it was May. And now it's June, July, August, September, right on the cusp of October. And we're like, oh man, like I don't actually remember how to do this another way. Like this has become normal. So if you're there in one or more areas of your life, this episode is for you. We are going to be talking today about just how do we walk through this? How can we make this a process that is hopeful and helpful and not reactionary, but also not just throwing our hands up and going, well, c'est la vie, and just letting things that we see as destructive or distractive, I'm going to make that word for now. How can we see those and then make intentional change? So that's today's conversation. I'm really excited to have you guys here for it. And yeah, let's get this conversation started. Welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast, a resource for parents who are feeling outpaced and overwhelmed as they raise children in a tech world. As an educator, parent, and tech user, I want to equip parents with the tools, resources, and confidence they need to raise kids who love God and use tech. All right, before we begin today, I want to start with just a couple things. First, I want to point out that if you go to the podcast notes for today, or if you go to our social media profile, you will find a link that takes you to the Gospel Tech online workshop. That workshop is focused. It's designed to help families build a family tech framework. There's a 100-page PDF that comes with it. That's a workbook. There is 7 video little like mini lessons that go through and basically help your family walk through this conversation. The videos are about 10 minutes each. And the idea is it is supposed to be very practical, very tangible to help your family with some of these overwhelming processes. So today's conversation is actually built off of that. You just don't get the pretty the pretty workbook page is what I was going for there. You do get a pretty podcast. You're welcome. But what we're trying to do with that resource is really make it useful for families so that parents, you can be the specialists and you can have that confidence you need to be able to have the conversation and not feel like, well, I'm just in over my head. I have no idea about this. The workshop really makes it very clear that it's actually not about you knowing everything about tech. It's about you knowing your kids and loving them and knowing that God has a purpose for them. So check that out. Second, thank you for listening to this podcast. And thank you to everyone who is listening. Thank you to those who have rated and reviewed. And we would just ask, if you listen to this, if you've listened to multiple episodes and there are things that help you with it, please share it with others and take 1 minute and rate and review. You can do it right out of whichever app you are listening on. And basically what that does is it helps other people find us. So please do rate and review. Thank you so much for listening, for sharing with people what is helping you. And we look forward to providing this without subscriptions and ads, not asking people to pay any money into this. We are providing this as a ministry and as a resource to families, and we just ask that you help us do that. So thank you so much. If you would like to reach out to us for any reason, you want to email, whatever it is. I was going to say text, but that's not actually an option. So if you want to reach out, you can DM us. You can go at Flint and Iron on Instagram or at Sparking Purpose on Facebook. You can also just email Nathan at flintandiron.org or Anna at flintandiron.org. And those will get right to us, and we will continue this conversation with you there. So let's jump in. Today, we are talking about what do we do instead of tech. So the spot we've got to start is first, we got to assess our need. So when we look at our tech use, we got to go, all right, is there currently a problem? We have to be able to delineate, is there actually something that needs to be fixed, or is this just something that is a new normal, or it's something I'm uncomfortable with, right? Our kids are often online for school. They're using their computers and they're attending classes over Zoom or Teams or whatever it is, right? So is it just a new normal, or is there actually the problem? The tool that Anna and I often reference is this thing we created called a reset, where you're going to look at your relationships, your responsibilities, your enjoyment, sleep, emotions, and time use. You can listen to the last podcast for more detail on that. But the idea is you're going to come down to, yes, there is a problem we have to address, or no, it's probably just a season, or this is just a time of life, but it's just different and it's not actually problematic. So once we've assessed it, then we have to go, all right, what do we do about this? Because really, at the end of the day, technology is not the problem. In fact, Jesus says it's not what goes into us that makes us unclean. It's what's coming out of us that is making us unclean. It's coming out of our heart. It's from the overflow of the heart that the mouth speaks, that our fingers search, that we type messages to others, that we respond to people, and that we allow technology to then overcome us, because really we're misplacing our hope. So as we start this conversation, we have to recognize that this is not about trying to control our kids or to quote unquote fix them, because our kids are not problems for us to fix. They are people for us to love, right? They are gifts from God for us to steward. They are souls that we are not responsible for, in that we can't save them, but we will stand before our Heavenly Father and He'll say, hey, what did you do with this blessing, this gift that I gave you? And we will be asked to respond with, what did I do, right? Did I point them to Jesus and show them hope? Or did I try to manipulate them and control them and make them more like myself, therefore evil, and really mess up that process and not show them the joy of the Lord and not lead them up in the way they should go? Proverbs 22:6 is not telling us to fix our kids. It's saying, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and let your kids see it. Right? Love your kids. Be the least of these for your kids, right? Serve them, be the last, be the servant of all. And in that, they're going to see Jesus. I have met no one who has met Jesus authentically, who has seen the servant leadership of Jesus, the death for his enemies of Jesus, and said, yeah, I hate that. Right? I just haven't met those people. I meet a lot of people that hate Christians. They hate church. They hate the idea of God. And when you start talking to them why, it's well because, and they insert some massive hurt they have, right? And the only thing that's going to overcome that is the Holy Spirit of God moving in that person and changing their hearts so that they can love. And that's where our kids are, right? So when we talk about this today, yes, we're talking about what do we do instead of tech. I'm not trying to give you a ammunition depot to go win some fight you have with your kids and prove that you're right. I'm trying to point you back to what God says about your kids and that hope that you have, and motivate you to love your kids really, really well. And it might involve removing some tech. That's very, very real possibility. But the why matters. Why are we removing it? Do we think we're saving our kids and keeping them somehow safe? Or are we providing space so that they can know God more? So first we assess a need, and in assessing the need, we recognize our need for God. And the real change here is that 2 Corinthians 5:17, that we need a new creation to happen. Not just a better one, not a slightly improved one. This is not spiritual yoga. I'm all for stretching, but if we think that we are going to somehow manipulate the tech around us and we'll achieve some kind of perfect existence, that's not true. That's a lie. The perfect existence comes from submitting to what God's asking us to do, and that's what we're assessing. That brings us to when we assess this tech, we might feel very real anger. Okay. I've recognized in my own tech use and then in dealing with others, there's this frustration that comes when tech starts to get in the way of life. We get mad about it, right? And usually it goes one of two ways. We either start to get mad at the technology itself, and we turn into that grumpy old person on their front lawn, right? Being like, kids these days, get off my lawn, right? Why do kids need those apps? Or they don't need all that technology. It's rotting their brains. And actually, we have some good research showing that it is in a lot of ways. But just getting jaded and cynical and mad at the technology typically leads us to the second outcome, which is we start getting mad at the people. So then we start going, well, look at those parents and what they're doing, and look at that situation. And we just start getting mad. And there's no real action points in that. There's just a lot of condemnation, and there's a lot of anger, and there's a lot of judgment. And so I want to note, when we get mad about it, that's okay. It's perfectly fine to get mad about technology. We need to make sure our madness, our anger, is focused at the right thing. I'm going to use the example of Jesus. So we're actually given two separate accounts of Jesus getting mad. Actually, we're given four, but I'm going to focus on two of them. Specifically the two where Jesus goes to Jerusalem during Passover. And the first one is from John 2:13, and it says that he goes in the temple and he clears it. And he starts kicking out the money changers and driving out the animals, right? And this is apparently very early in his ministry. This is not the triumphal entry as far as the John goes. And it's not Mark. Mark's written in like kind of wonky order sometimes. This apparently is a separate account of Jesus doing this. And what was happening is the Jewish leadership had basically brought in money changers and people selling items needed for Passover. So people were coming to Jerusalem. They were going to celebrate Passover. And they were like, hey, we're going to make this really easy for you guys. We're also going to charge a little surplus, make a nice profit off this. We're going to have people selling the animals you need right here inside the temple. Very accessible, right? Very, very modern of them to think this way. And Jesus loses his mind, right? He absolutely goes, he literally makes a corded rope in the second account and starts like driving animals out with it, kicking over tables. Like this is not like low blood sugar Jesus that's often portrayed, right? This is him, and it says it in I believe it's the Luke account that he is teaching while he's doing this, talking about how the zeal for the zeal for the Lord will overcome me, and that you've made my Father's house a den of thieves, and this is unacceptable, right? And he's basically running them through the prophets and explaining why what he's doing shows he's Messiah and shows that they don't properly love God, right? He has real anger. And his anger then drives him towards making it accessible. Here's the special caveat on that. He's not just mad at the greed. Where they set up shop is the court of the Gentiles. So when people would come to worship God, remember, God didn't have any idols. He didn't say, well, make an image of me and then go worship that. Actually, it's exactly the opposite. He's like, you're going to worship me in spirit and in truth. And what's going to happen is we're going to have a personal relationship. You go read the Psalms of David. Like this is a personal God. That is not something ancient religions had. They had angry gods. They had judgmental gods. They didn't have personal gods who cared about an individual. So we have an individual caring God here who says, I love you and want you to come worship me. So Gentiles couldn't enter into the promise of the Jewish people, but they were still invited into the relationship. And the court of the Gentiles is where they would do that. Well, that was filled up with animals and money changers now. And when we say a lot, Josephus is a historian at the time. He said that up to 250,000 lambs were killed over Passover. Now, Josephus also exaggerated. So the idea is a lot. So this isn't just a small number. Like Gentile people can't get in and worship God now. Jesus sees this. Now, Jesus also sees Israel occupied by Romans who were pretty terrible people. He also sees a lot of injustice happening outside, right? Like he sees a lot of stuff. What does he take action against? Where does he focus his anger? He focuses at getting rid of the impediments of people seeking the face of God, of seeking relationship with God. He goes into the temple and drives out the distractions and says, absolutely not. Yeah, you can keep your animals, you can sell them. It's not the demon situation where the pigs run into the lake and drown. The animals don't die. They just can't be in the temple. They can't be a distraction. So when we look at our tech and we assess it and we look at our kids and the hope we have for our kids, their relationship with God, right? We go, man, your full potential lies in knowing who God's made you to be and connecting fully with God so that you can be all that God's made you to be in this life and then celebrate that relationship with God forever. then I can get angry and go, man, that is absolutely eating away at your potential. It's eating away at who you've been made to be. It's destroying these beautiful parts of what God's put in you. That makes me mad. I'm not mad at you. I'm not even mad at the tech. I am mad at the distraction from who you can be. So I wanted to spend all this time kind of front loading that because sometimes tech's just annoying and I just get bothered by it and I just want to throw it out a window, right? And that, I would argue, is, even if it's the right action, done in the wrong way, we can actually do more damage. We can make our kids really, really angry. We can really distance that relationship. We can hurt their ability to hear the love in the action and to connect with God because we're now setting a bad model of that. So I want to really say that first thing we do is assess the need. The second thing we're going to do is focus that anger. It's all right to be mad about it. In fact, if we're not mad at our kids getting distracted because, well, they could be doing something worse, I'm going to challenge you right now to pray through that. That is not a standard we've been given, okay? It is easy to get there. It's all right to think that they're not as bad as other kids or they could be doing something worse. If your kid is healthy, then that's fine, right? Yeah. That's a wonderful thing. I just say my kid's healthy and move from there. But if it's not that bad, that's not a standard we've been given when being made new and made to look like Jesus. So then we go to, all right, well, what do we do with this anger and this very specific reestablishing of tech boundaries? Because we have a negative rut. We have a show situation that's out of hand. We have an attitude situation that's out of hand. We have games that are not fitting our family expectation, but we let them slide because we were just surviving for the last 7 months. Like, we have music that doesn't live up to our standards. Like, what do we do? The next step in this reestablishing tech boundaries is we remove the offending tech, whatever that is for specifically the Drool tech, and we replace it. So this is coming out of Matthew 5:29. And if I were to read that to you, Jesus is speaking. He says, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better for you to lose one of your members than your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better for you to lose one of your members than your whole body to go into hell. And what he's talking about here is he's specifically setting up this idea that really it comes down to our hearts. So we're not just saying, well, fix your actions and everything's fine. It's like, no. If something is causing you to sin, get rid of whatever that thing is. If it's causing your heart to long and yearn after something that isn't what God is asking you to do, get rid of that thing. It's not worth it. It's better to go on hobbling through life and lose the convenience of whatever that thing is than to go forward and continue to sin and separate yourself from this relationship. So we've done a reset, we remove, okay? I think the best example I've seen of this is where it's a physical removal of whatever the offending technology might be. So we say, hey, we're going to delete this app. We are going to remove technology from that private space and we're going to put it in this public space, right? We're physically altering the way we function. I've seen people get rid of their smartphones. They're like, hey, this smartphone causes me to think too much about work, to think too much about money, to think too much about lustful opportunities, right? To compare myself too much. Like, I'm just going to get rid of this and move to another option. And as many of us would acknowledge, that would very much feel like cutting off a hand, right? Like, that was so useful for my daily life. But remember what Jesus is challenging us on. Usefulness is not our standard, right? Not as bad as some things is not our standard. We are looking specifically for, does it help us glorify God, to love God more with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength? So we remove whatever's distracting, and then we replace it. And here's what's cool. When we take what I'm going to call analog adventures, so these are things that operate at the pace of real life. They generally are going to be non-digital, but I would argue there are tool tech things we can put back in place that are fine. We just have to be very intentional about what are we replacing with. We don't just want to take one poison out and put a less offensive poison in. But we want to pick things that are going to allow us to be more present, meaning we will have the space and the mental time and bandwidth to be able to recognize relationships and individuals around us. We're going to be more present, right? We're going to be able to hold eye contact. We're going to be able to deal with some boredom. We're going to know how to at least handle conflict, right? What doesn't mean we're always going to like it, but we're at least going to know what to do, how to hear others, and really be present in that. Being present, not running away when life gets hard, is huge, right? So it's going to let us be more present because we're going to lose that kind of trigger outlet of, well, when this happens, I always run to this one thing. We're going to avoid developing a lot of negative habits, and we're also going to avoid some of the programming, the behavioral programming that comes from a lot of our Drool tech use and kind of some of that content. So you're not going to run into things like super violent content or accidental porn exposure, or so a lot of young people dealing with social media and gaming specifically deal with depression and run into topics of suicide and have just a lot of stuff that's really heavy. We avoid a lot of that when we remove it. And we can find joy in real life. I think when we look at, man, we're just being present at the pace of real life. We're being involved in real-time successes and losses and struggle. We recognize more of who God is just through the living process. So I'm reminded of John Muir, if you read any of his wilderness essays. Right? John Muir is not a Christian man. He's not talking about the God of the Bible, but he cannot help when he sees mountains and skies and animals and trees to recognize, man, this is a really big universe we live in. This is a very small planet, and this is all incredibly beautiful, and it kind of blew his mind, right? And reading his essays, you're not an optimist about like nature and hiking and stuff. John Muir is a great spot to go. He will make a very solid pitch for the beauty of the outdoors. But just that idea that we can find joy in real life. Part of the problem when we are overstimulated, which would be one of the downsides, one of the negative habits we get from our digital tech, is that our need for stimulation and often for dopamine is this constant feedback loop makes real life really unexciting. And you can untrain that. Dr. Victoria Dunkley wrote a whole book on retraining the brain and basically said it's at least a month to get your brain. So basically your brain in normal life, if you do something right, it gets a reward and says, do that again because that helped us. Whatever it was, learning math, eating food, whatever it is, dopamine is involved as a reward hormone in some of those tasks. Well, video games and social media through things like rewards and like buttons and things like that can get you dopamine way, way, way faster than real life. But then your brain gets overwhelmed. And instead of being able to just enjoy things more, it actually starts to shut down some of the receptors for receiving that reward hormone. So now let's use Nathan style numbers. If there were 10 receptors, it goes to 7. So now when real life wasn't giving you anything near the amount, those 7, you're only getting 70% of that normal life amount, and now life just feels boring. And you will see kids, if you have kids, especially in the gaming world, who are really into gaming, and that's where they find a lot of their joy, they're kind of catatonic in normal life, right? There's not a lot of expression until you mention video games. And man, then the eyes light up and the speech shoots up, the words per minute bumps through the roof, right? And what just happened to there is their brain went, video games, boom, here's some dopamine. And all of a sudden now that's exciting again. Well, that can be retrained. That's not a permanent damage thing. That is a trained behavior that is learned from their body trying to survive the sheer amount of stimulation it's receiving. So we pick analog adventures, non-digital adventures that happen at the pace of real life that can avoid some of the negative habits of distraction and self-destruction. And we can find joy in doing real life stuff, which leads us to, all right, but how? Like, this is all good. I don't disagree with any of it. Like, what do I do instead? And I think let me run through a couple. So I don't love giving specific examples like, well, if your kid likes gaming, then always go do this, because kids are so different. Like, we've all been wired differently. And that's the final piece I'll get to. But before I get there, when we talk about, I want to kind of walk this out through story. So we talk about being more present, avoiding negative habits, like the analog adventure, remove, replace piece. I'll give a couple examples. So there was a young man who was big into just watching videos online. They weren't inappropriate videos, but it steadily became a thing. And he had actually gotten into videos online because he was gaming too much. So he was playing too much video games. It was hurting his schooling. It was his junior year of high school. And he's like, man, like, this is becoming a thing for me. He talked with his parents and they agreed, yeah, you're going to just quit playing video games. So he's like, fine, I'll just kind of start watching them. And if you're not familiar, there's YouTube has a gaming setup, but Twitch would be an example of a gaming site where you watch people play video games. And it might sound weird, but it's kind of like any other thing. Like, if you're not into sports, you want to watch people be good at something you enjoy. So you watch them play video games you like, right? Like, it makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of very engaging people there. And so maybe they're not the best gamer, but you just like their personality. They're funny. And so you just kind of hang out online and watch these people play maybe a half hour, maybe a couple hours. And this young man was literally putting in 6 to 8 hours a day watching people stream video games. Well, that became a real thing for him. And so his parents actually had him get in contact with me, and we had a couple sessions where we sat down and talked through, hey, what does this look like? Like, what are your goals? What do you hope for? And if you asked him those kinds of questions, he would be able to verbalize, well, I want to go to this college. I want to play this sport. I want to do these things. And then you go, all right, well, how are these actions helping you? And he's like, well, they're not. Like, all right, what do you think you should do? Right? Like, I didn't actually have to fix any of this for him, talking him through what his goals were and what his purpose was. And he was a believer. So we were able to talk about, what does God say about you? And does this line up? He was able to say, man, I need to like get rid of my video watching entirely. And it ended up that he finished his senior year without any video watching or video games. And he ended up actually getting rid of his smartphone. And that included when he went to college and he played golf. And so when he was on bus trips, going to golf tournaments, he didn't have a smartphone. So everyone in the bus is watching videos and playing games. And he's the only kid sitting there, like actually being fully present. He's like, actually, like, yeah, it was boring for me, but the main thing is I watched what my friends were missing out on. Like, they didn't get the experience and the anticipation and even the joy of like talking to the few people around them that aren't plugged in. They basically took a nap, played a game, and then magically arrived wherever they were. And it just removed some of the experience. And I thought that was a really cool way of seeing that when we talk about, all right, he now gets to fully experience his college athletics goals that he was missing out on, even maybe college, because he was failing classes. Like, that 8 hours a day he was doing it in class with AirPods in, and like, it was a whole thing, right? Well, that's not just shows, right? There's gaming. So I had a young man who was gaming, and it was to the point where he was so into like the control of video games. He really loved the idea that he could make the next thing happen. And his parents lovingly talked him through that. They removed games. Again, this kid was gaming on a smartphone, so his smartphone went away. Not punitively, it was in conversation. It was actually really, really well set up. And they found he had a passion for that kind of control engineering piece. And they got him into a local robotics club. And now that young man's going into his sophomore year. He's taking senior level calculus and is super into his robotics club and is like very passionate about it. Taught himself how to use a 3D, it's like an AutoCAD basically, where they're 3D design computer program where he makes 3D designs in his computer as a 3D printer, so he can make these things and try new projects. And that's where he's putting his time. It's all operating at the pace of real life. A lot of it's still digital, but it's not receiving stimulation. He's creating with it, and that's awesome. And I think the third would be a young man I ran into with social media, where it was such a toxic thing for his family, and he was having these really, really low days because things would happen on social media, or it wouldn't go his way, or his parents would limit the amount of time he had, and he felt like they were putting him in a box. And they actually found a group of friends who were able to get him into dirt biking, like motor dirt biking, not mountain biking. And they decided as a family, hey, like, you save up X amount, we will match that, and you will be able to buy yourself this used dirt bike. And then on weekends, like, here's this group of friends that you're going to go ride with. And all of those to me are super cool examples. Please note, none of them were the same. They all had different issues. They manifest in different ways. And all of these young men were very, very different, but found analog adventures. Now, none of those boys are saved because of the analog adventures, but what did we do? Man, we pulled them back from the brink of some self-destructive habits, of some really negative influences, and from missing out on really cool opportunities, both in relationship and in their future potential, because they were willing to give it up for the kind of cheap and easy escape of whatever their favorite go-to tech resource was. So that's what we're talking about when we say we remove and replace with analog adventures. And the reason I don't just say, well, just do this, is because there's no one rote adventure that's going to work for your kid. There's kind of a range. Now, if you really want specifics for your kid, go check out the Gospel Tech online workshop. This is what it's built for. You walk through this process of talking through the framework of technology, the gospel framework of technology, and then there's a section that specifically says, how do we make analog adventures that fit our family? I'm going to give you a little cheat piece here. I'm actually going to run you through it, but the workbook was designed to like have graphics and help you circle things and like actually talk through it. So if this is something where you're like, yeah, that's what we need, please go check out the online workshop. It is a real thing, and we are so excited that it's actually something that families can walk through on their own, and you don't need Nathan specifically telling you how to run your life. You can actually do that. I will guide you through the process and help kind of start the conversation in the video section, and then you guys will run with it, and it'll be beautiful. So I guess the final piece when we talk about How do we make analog adventures? It's a 3-step process. The first piece is look at your kids' gifts, interests, and passions. When we see young people that we're raising, we recognize, man, they are just good at things. Sometimes it's because of their mom or their dad, like, wow, I recognize that, right? Like Owen, my oldest, is super competitive and he is really good at staying focused on a task. That is his mother. Like that's not me. But Anna played 2 different sports in college and is hyper competitive and is very, very good at starting something and finishing strong, right? That's her jam. So we recognize, all right, Owen is going to probably have different interests and a different area of focus for an activity than maybe Henry, who's much more like me. Like he's hyper social and it's cool if he doesn't win as long as he got to do it with you. And like, it's why puzzles are currently Henry's favorite. Like everyone does it and there's no losers. Like everyone wins with a puzzle. So just recognize your kid has interests. They've got passions and speak life into that. Tell your kid, like, I really recognize that your love of video games really seems to stem from this piece of you that's really a good thing, right? Your love of social media really seems to be stemming from like your ability to connect people, your desire to like see other people flourish or whatever that might be for them, to share ideas. So tap into that passion and then redirect it to something analog. And that might be, here, I'll give a very specific, Owen. So Owen loves sports. He's very focused. He likes that. But there's not any sports going on right now in our area. You can sign up and go to practice, but that's just not, he doesn't interest him. He gets really mad when there's no winners and losers, when there's no games. He wants some competition in there. So Anna and I decided, hey, you know what we're going to do? We are going to look at other activities. We asked him, he said, I want to do archery. Well, I'm not a bow hunter. I've never done archery. He did it one time at the Puyallup Fair, the Washington State Fair, excuse me. But it's really the Puyallup Fair. Let's be serious. I did it 2 years ago and he just has decided like, I want to do archery. Let's try it out. Well, we went through and we're like, all right, we know that's a passion. Then we need to look at time and we need to look at the ability. Like, do we have the money, a location, and someone who can help him, a specialist? Like that's based on that. Can we do it? And actually we do, right? I can pick an hour at some point in the next week where we go, all right, we have an hour. We can go and do this. We have the money because we were going to spend money on soccer, and a little kid's bow with the arrows off Amazon is like $35. That's cheaper than soccer. So, all right, we have that already set aside. We've already saved up for it. We have a location. My grandpa, my dad, has a huge yard and no neighbors. So we can set a hay bale out there or go buy a target. Like we can do that. We will have an area. We can use a bow and arrow without hurting somebody. And I have friends who are bow hunters. Like I can actually connect with people who can teach us how to do this safely. And even though I know nothing about, I don't know the different parts of it. I'm assuming there's different parts of a bow, but I don't even know if there are parts of a bow. So there we are. But like that idea, right? When we go to find it, we got to make sure it lines up with their passion, that we have a time planned for this new activity to occur, and that we have the ability, we have the resource, financial resource, we have a location, and we have a knowledge base, whether our own knowledge base or a specialist that we can reach out to. So when you're looking at analog adventures, then you go, all right, well, what's my kid passionate about? We run through that. Okay, do we have this built in? When is this happening? Is it going to be 30 minutes every day they're going to do this activity? Is it once a week? Is it like the young man with dirt bikes? This is going to happen 2 weekends a month, right? We're going to schedule them ahead of time. Analog adventures have to take a priority in your life because it's not part of your rhythm. It's not part of your habit. It's not natural and fluid for you. It's going to take work. And part of that work is saying, here's the space and time. We can put our finger on it when this activity is going to happen. Great. Then we're going to make sure, where is it going to happen and how are we paying for it, right? And who's going to help us. So we can't pick rock climbing if there are no natural rock formations and no gyms to help us, and we don't want to install one in our garage, right? Like those are the resources. Maybe you have the resource to put in your own rock climbing walls. Awesome. Just make sure you are picking ideas that aren't just pie in the sky. Man, it'd be awesome if our kids could go to whatever the idea is, right? Whitewater rafting course, right? That's great, but it's the middle of winter. So what are we going to do now? And find those activities. Again, way more kind of options and details if you use the online workshop, but I wanted to walk through that because I believe that as we walk through these conversations, as we recognize our need for some changed habits when it comes to technology, we are going to be able to better talk through the gospel with our kids. We're going to be able to point them towards, hey, do you see the way this is a distraction from who you are and what you stand for? Now, if your kids are 5 or 6, by the way, that probably doesn't work. Like, you can just tell them, we love you. We see that this doesn't help you, and we're going to give you something awesome that does. That's fine. That doesn't have to go any further beyond that. But by the time we're talking 10-year-old, that kid does need to start to be part of this conversation and part of processing through, well, how do you feel that tech impacts you, and why is that important? And again, the framework process does this. Your kid gets a voice and gets to share. I understand, Mom and Dad, you don't like my music, or you don't like social media, or you don't like these video games, but here's where I'm coming from. And there are some very legitimate reasons that may not make sense to us as adults for why these kids want to be engaged. And if they're healthy with it, if they pass that reset, great. Like, I think that's your conversation to have, right? When it's not healthy, we can now talk them through, here's what it is. We're not just removing you and leaving you in a void. Like, we want you to find passion and interest, and we're willing to invest in that to the best ability we can right now. Maybe you need to get a job and help pay for some of those, but that needs to be the arc of the conversation to where you can land on, man, here's what we're going to be doing. Here's when we're doing it. Here's where we're doing it. Here's who's helping us doing it. And here's the budget we've got to make that happen. And it's going to be amazing. And I would love to actually hear what you guys come up with, because every single story for every kid, even multiple kids within the same family, they've got different kind of pitfalls with their tech use. They've got different solutions when it comes to their analog adventures. And the whole point of those adventures is tapping more into who God's made them to be, so that they could better love God and better love others. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope that this conversation is encouraging, and that you hear it and go, yeah, I do want to start this. And I would just point you back to the first thing we're going to do is we're going to assess that need based on the hope we have for our kids and for ourselves in the gospel, right? That we are new creations. And in light of that, we don't have to live by the old ways. We can drop the sins that so easily entangle us and run with perseverance the race marked out for us, that we can actually go out and we can, Ephesians 2:10, go and do the good works God has prepared beforehand for us to do. And we don't want anything that gets in the way of those good works. We want to be like Jesus in getting angry, righteously mad at the stuff that gets in the way. And we can pray that God will help us do that. You can ask God, help me hate the sin in my life. Help me hate the distractions in my life, because sometimes I don't hate them. Sometimes I'm just like, well, could be worse, right? And that's not the standard we've been given. So we can pray through, Lord, help us have that for our own hearts. Help us live into that for our kids and communicate that hope in love, right? Grace and truth is who Jesus is. And we want to convey that to our kids. So I'm excited for you guys. I'm excited as this conversation goes forward for you. And if you want to reach out to us, feel free to email me, nathan@flintandiron.org. You can direct message through Instagram, so it's @FlintandIron, or Facebook @SparkingPurpose. And I'm really excited to continue this conversation as we all work together to better love God and use tech.